I was sitting in a corner booth of a small diner on a Tuesday evening, the kind of place where the fluorescent lights flicker just enough to make everything feel a little sadder than it actually is, and I want you to understand something before I go any further. I am not a man who cries easily. I have been through things in my life that would break most people, and I kept it together. I kept moving. But on that night, a little girl no older than 7 walked up to my table, looked me dead in the eyes with all the seriousness a child can manage, and whispered 4 words that completely shattered the wall I had spent 3 years building around my heart. She said, "My mom still cries over you, and I need you to tell me, what would you have done in that moment? Because I still don't know if what I did next was the bravest thing I've ever done, or the most foolish. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because this story doesn't start in that diner. It starts about 7 years ago, in a small apartment on the east side of the city, where I was a 29-year-old man who thought he had his entire life figured out. I had a good job working in logistics, managing shipping schedules for a mid-sized company. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills. It gave me structure, and I was proud of it. I had a small circle of friends, a beat-up truck I loved more than I probably should have, and I had Elena, who had this laugh that could fill up a room without even trying. Elena, who used to leave little notes in my jacket pockets for me to find during the workday. Elena, who I was absolutely, completely, 100% convinced I was going to marry. We had been together for 4 years. 4 years of grocery runs and lazy Sunday mornings, and learning each other's rhythms so well that we didn't even need to talk half the time. We just knew. She knew I needed quiet when I came home stressed. I knew she needed a hug before any serious conversation, not after. We weren't perfect, but we were real, and real felt like enough. We had talked about the future. About a house, about kids, about all of it. I had actually been putting money aside for an engagement ring for almost 8 months. 8 months of skipping lunches and turning down weekend trips with friends, all for this one moment I had been planning in my head for longer than I want to admit. And then, without any warning that I could see at the time, everything fell apart. Elena told me she needed space, that she felt like she had lost herself in our relationship, that she needed to figure out who she was outside of us. I remember sitting on the couch listening to her say those words and feeling like the floor was dropping out from under me in slow motion. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I think I was in too much shock to do either. I just nodded, like I understood, even though I didn't understand anything at all. She moved out within 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and 4 years were just gone. What happened in the months that followed was something I am not entirely proud of, but I'm going to be honest with you because that's the only way this story makes any sense. I fell apart quietly. I went to work, I came home, I stared at walls. I stopped calling friends. I gained weight because I stopped caring about eating real meals. The ring fund I had saved up. I used it to cover rent for 2 months when my hours got cut at work, which felt like the universe adding a little extra cruelty just for fun. I was grieving, but I was grieving silently. The way men are often told they're supposed to, which mostly just meant I was drowning without telling anyone I couldn't swim. About 8 months after Elena left, something happened that I did not see coming. I got a call from my sister telling me that my brother-in-law had been in a serious accident. He survived, thank God, but he needed a long recovery, and my sister needed help with their son, my nephew, Marcus, who was 4 years old at the time. She needed someone she trusted to watch him several days a week, while my brother-in-law was in the hospital and she was working to keep their insurance from lapsing. Without even thinking twice, I said yes. I drove over the next morning with a bag packed, and I just moved in to help for what I thought would be a few weeks. Those few weeks turned into 4 months. And those 4 months changed me, in ways I still don't have the right words for. Taking care of Marcus, making his breakfast, reading him stories, figuring out how to braid his hair, because my sister always braided it, and he cried when I tried to use a brush. Pulled me out of my own head in a way that nothing else had been able to. He needed me, and needing to be needed turned out to be exactly the medicine I hadn't known I was looking for. By the time my brother-in-law was recovered and I moved back to my own apartment, I was a different person. quieter in a good way, more patient, more present. And I had made a decision that I told exactly no one about for almost a month, because I was still figuring out how to say it out loud. I wanted to adopt. Not as some grand romantic gesture toward myself, not to fill a hole left by Elena, but because something had genuinely shifted in me during those months with Marcus. I had discovered a kind of love I hadn't known I was capable of, and I didn't want to walk away from it. I started the process of looking into foster care and adoption as a single man, and let me tell you, the world will very quickly remind you of how difficult that road is. There were people who questioned my motives, systems that were not designed with single fathers in mind, and a mountain of paperwork that made my logistics job look simple by comparison. But I kept going. 14 months later, I brought home my son. His name was Daniel, and he was 3 years old, and he had the most serious little face I had ever seen on a child, like he had already decided that the world required careful observation before any trust could be given. Which, given what he had been through before he came to me, made complete sense. The first night, he sat on the edge of the bed in his new room and looked at me and asked, very quietly, if I was going to send him back. I sat down next to him, and I told him that this was his home, and that I wasn't going anywhere, and that I would be saying that same thing to him every single day until he believed it. And I meant every word. Life as a single father was hard in ways I hadn't fully anticipated, even after all my preparation. Money was tight. Childcare costs alone were staggering, and I had taken a slightly lower-paying job closer to home so I could be available for school pickups and sick days. I downsized my apartment. I sold the truck. I stopped doing a lot of the things I used to do for fun, not because I resented Daniel for it, but because my fun had simply become different. His laugh was my fun. Watching him slowly, carefully, decide to trust me, that was everything. I hadn't thought about Elena in a long time. Or rather, I had trained myself not to. I had constructed a life so full of purpose and responsibility, and love that there wasn't much room left for old wounds to breathe. I dated a little here and there over those 3 years. Nothing serious, nothing that felt right, nothing I pursued beyond a few dinners. I was not looking for anything. I was just living, one day at a time, doing my best for my kid, and trying to be grateful for what I had instead of mourning what I didn't. Which brings me back to that diner on a Tuesday night. Daniel was at a sleepover at his best friend's house. His first sleepover ever, a milestone we had both been nervous about. And I found myself alone for an evening with absolutely nothing to do. I went to this little diner because it was cheap and close, and I could sit there with a cup of coffee and nobody would bother me. I ordered a grilled cheese and a bowl of soup because I was a 36-year-old man eating alone on a Tuesday, and grilled cheese and soup felt like the appropriate meal for that particular energy. I was reading something on my phone, just decompressing, when I felt someone standing near my table. I looked up, expecting a server. Instead, it was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with dark curly hair pulled into 2 puffs on either side of her head, and the most enormous brown eyes I have ever seen. She was staring at me with that particular intensity that small children deploy when they have decided something is important. I looked around, trying to figure out whose child this was, and I spotted a woman a few booths away, half standing, watching with an expression on her face that I could not immediately read. Somewhere between alarm and something else I couldn't name. And then the little girl leaned forward, cupped her hand around her mouth like she was sharing a secret, and she whispered it. "My mom still cries over you." I went completely still. My brain just stopped processing for a moment. I looked at her, and then I looked across the diner at the woman, and the woman was already walking toward us, and as she got closer, the air left my lungs completely. Because it was Elena. It was Elena, 3 years older, and she was looking at me like she had just been caught doing something she hadn't planned on being caught doing. And her daughter, had just told me that she still cried over me, so that's where I was, sitting in a diner with a grilled cheese going cold in front of me, staring at the woman I had once planned to propose to. While her daughter stood there like a tiny, curly-haired grenade that had just gone off in the middle of my carefully organized life. And I had to decide, in about 4 seconds, what kind of man I was going to be in this moment. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to stop and genuinely think about this. What would you have done? Would you have been cold? Would you have walked away? Would the hurt have won? Comment below, because I am genuinely curious, because I have played that moment back 1,000 times, and I still think about the road not taken. What I did was stand up. Not in anger, not in triumph. I just stood up, because it felt wrong to have this conversation sitting down. Elena reached us, and immediately put her hand on her daughter's shoulder and said, "Lily, what did I tell you about running off?" And Lily, completely unbothered, said, "You said don't talk to strangers, but he's not a stranger. He's the man from the picture." And there it was. There it was. Elena closed her eyes for just a moment, and when she opened them, she looked at me and said, "Marcus, I'm so sorry. She found an old photo and I didn't. I'm sorry." And her voice broke on the last word just slightly, but I looked at her. I looked at Lily. And I said the only thing that felt honest. I said, "Do you want to sit down?" We sat down. Lily wedged herself into the booth next to me, without being invited, and started inspecting my soup with great scientific interest. And Elena sat across from me, and we just looked at each other for a moment with 3 years of silence between us. She told me she had moved back to the city about a year ago. That she had gone through a lot of changes after we broke up. Things she had been running from, she said. Things about herself that she hadn't been willing to look at. She had done therapy, she had grown. And she had also, she said quietly, never really stopped wondering about me. I told her about Daniel. I watched her face when I said it. Watched the surprise, then the softening, then what looked genuinely like admiration. She asked questions, real ones, not polite ones. She wanted to know about him, about how the adoption had gone, about what he was like. And something about the way she listened. It was the same way she had always listened, fully. Like, you were the only person in the room. Made something in my chest ache, in the most complicated way imaginable. We sat in that diner for 2 hours. Lily fell asleep against my arm about 40 minutes in, which neither Elena nor I addressed because addressing it would have required acknowledging how remarkable it was that this child, who had never met me, had done that. We talked about the years we had missed. We talked carefully, the way people do when they are aware that they are walking through a minefield, and they are choosing their steps slowly. There was hurt there. I'm not going to pretend there wasn't. At one point she said, "I know I hurt you. I know I left when you needed me. I don't have an excuse. I just have an explanation, if you ever want to hear it." And I told her, honestly, that I wasn't sure yet, but that I was glad she said it. When it was time to go, she transferred a sleeping Lily to her shoulder with the practiced ease of a parent. And we stood outside the diner in the evening air. She said, "I don't want to ask for anything. I'm glad we ran into each other." And I nodded, and I meant it, and then I said, "My son would probably like to meet someone who falls asleep on strangers. He'd respect that." And she laughed. That laugh. That same laugh that used to fill up rooms. And I thought about the man I was at 29 who had saved up for a ring, and the man I was at 36 who had built an entire life, and I thought about how sometimes the things that break us are also the things that build us into something. We couldn't have become any other way. We exchanged numbers that night. We took it slow. And I mean genuinely, actually slow, not movie slow where slow means 2 weeks, real slow, months of occasional texts, then phone calls, then a proper coffee where Daniel and Lily sat at a separate table and Daniel solemnly explained to Lily the rules of a card game he had invented, and Lily listened with complete respect for someone who had very recently been a stranger. Watching those 2 kids together, watching Daniel, who had spent so long being careful about the world, decide that Lily was safe, was something I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I'm not going to wrap this up in a bow and tell you that everything is perfect. Life isn't perfect, and I'm too old and too tired to pretend otherwise. Elena and I are taking things one day at a time, and I am keeping my eyes open and my heart guarded but not closed, which I think is the right balance. What I will tell you is this. I went into that diner alone, eating my grilled cheese, convinced that my chapter for romantic love had quietly closed, and that I was at peace with it. and a little girl with curly hair and enormous eyes walked up to my table and reminded me that the stories we tell ourselves about what's over and what's possible are not always the same story the universe is telling. The thing I want you to take from this, if you take anything, is that the detours are not always punishments. Losing Elena sent me to help my sister, which gave me Marcus, which opened something in me that led me to Daniel. Daniel gave me a reason to keep going when I had quietly stopped having one, and a random Tuesday in a diner, of all places, gave me back something I thought I had permanently lost. You don't always get to see the shape of your own story while you're still living it. Sometimes you just have to keep moving and trust that the pieces are going somewhere. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever had something lost come back to you in a form you didn't expect, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments below. Your story matters, and I read every single one. Like this video if you were rooting for me in that diner booth, because knowing you're out there, watching, actually means more than I know how to say. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, because I have lived a whole lot of life and I am just getting started sharing it. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded today that the ending hasn't been written yet. I'll see you all in the next story.